Jamaica Inn by Daphne Du Maurier. Chapter 1. It was a cold gray day in late November. The weather had changed overnight when a backing wind brought a granite sky and a mizzling rain with it. And although it was now only a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the pallor of a winter evening seemed to have closed upon the hills, cloaking them in mist. It would be dark by 4. The air was clammy cold, and for all the tightly closed windows it penetrated the interior of the coach. The leather seats felt damp to the hands, and there must have been a small crack in the roof, because now and again little drips of rain fell softly through, smudging the leather and leaving a dark blue stain like a splotch of ink. The wind came in gusts, at times shaking the coach as it traveled round the bend of the road, and in the exposed places on the high ground it blew with such force that the whole body of the coach trembled and swayed, rocking between the high wheels like a drunken man. The driver, muffled in a greatcoat to his ears, bent almost double in his seat in a faint endeavor to gain shelter from his own shoulders, while the dispirited horses plodded sullenly to his command, too broken by the wind and the rain to feel the whip that now and again cracked above their heads, while it swung between the numb fingers of the driver. The wheels of the coach creaked and groaned as they sank onto the ruts on the road, and sometimes they flung up the soft spattered mud against the windows, where it mingled with the constant driving rain, and whatever view there might have been of the countryside was hopelessly obscured. The few passengers huddled together for warmth, exclaiming in unison when the coach sank into a heavier rut than usual, and one old fellow, who had kept up a constant complaint ever since he had joined the coach at Truro, rose from his seat in a fury, and fumbling with the window sash, let the window down with a crash, bringing a shower of rain in upon himself and his fellow passengers. He thrust his head out and shouted up to the driver, cursing him in a high, petulant voice for a rogue and a murderer, that they would all be dead before they reached Bodmin if he persisted in driving at breakneck speed. They had no breath left in their bodies as it was, and he, for one, would never travel by coach again. Whether the driver heard him or not was uncertain. It seemed more likely that the stream of reproaches was carried away in the wind, for the old fellow, after waiting a moment, put up the window again, having thoroughly chilled the interior of the coach, and settling himself once more in his corner, wrapped his blanket about his knees and muttered in his beard. His nearest neighbor, a jovial red-faced woman in a blue cloak, sighed heavily in sympathy, and, with a wink to anyone who might be looking and a jerk of her head towards the old man, she remarked for at least the 20th time that it was the dirtiest night she ever remembered, and she had known some, that it was proper old weather and no mistaking it for summer this time. And burrowing into the depths of a large basket, she brought out a great hunk of cake and plunged into it with strong white teeth. Mary Yellen sat in the opposite corner, where the trickle of rain oozed through the crack in the roof. Sometimes a cold drip of moisture fell upon her shoulder, which she brushed away with impatient fingers. She sat with her chin cupped in her hands, her eyes fixed on the window splashed with mud and rain, hoping with a sort of desperate interest that some ray of light would break the heavy blanket of sky, and but a momentary trace of that lost blue heaven that had mantled Helford yesterday shine for an instant as a forerunner of fortune. Already, though barely 40 miles by road from what had been her home for 23 years, the hope within her heart had tired, and that rather gallant courage which was so large a part of her, and had stood her in such stead during the long agony of her mother's illness and death, was now shaken by this first fall of rain and the nagging wind. The country was alien to her, which was a defeat in itself. As she peered through the misty window of the coach, she looked out upon a different world from the one she had known only a day's journey back. How remote now, and hidden perhaps, for ever were there shining waters of Helford, the green hills and the sloping valleys, the white cluster of cottages at the water's edge. It was a gentle rain that fell at Helford, a rain that pattered in the many trees and lost itself in the lush grass, formed into brooks and rivulets that emptied into the broad river, sank into the grateful soil which gave back flowers in payment. This was a lasting, pitiless rain that stung the windows of the coach, and it soaked into a hard and barren soil. No trees here, save one or two that stretched bare branches to the four winds, bent and twisted from centuries of storm. And so blackened were they by time and tempest that even if spring did breathe on such a place, no buds would dare to come to leaf for fear that the latest frost should kill them. It was a scrubby land, without hedgerow or meadow, a country of stones, black heather, and stunted broom. There would never be a gentle season here, thought Mary, either grim winter as it was today, or else the dry and parching heat of midsummer, with never a valley to give shade or shelter, but grass that turned yellow-brown before May was past. The country had gone gray with the weather. Even the people on the road and in the villages changed in harmony with their background. At Helston, where she had taken the first coach, she had trodden familiar ground. So many childish memories clung about Helston. The weekly drive to market with her father in the vanished days, and when he was taken from them, the fortitude with which her mother held his place, driving backwards and forwards, winter and summer, as he had done, with her hens and her eggs and her butter at the back of the cart, while Mary sat at her side, clutching a basket as big as herself, her small chin resting on the handle. Folk were friendly in Helston. The name of Yellen was known and respected in the town, for the widow had had a hard fight against life when her husband died. And there were not many women who would have lived alone as she did with one child and a farm to tend, with never a thought of taking another man. There was a farmer at Manican who would have asked her had he dared, and another up the river at Gweek, but they could tell from her eyes that she would have neither of them, but belonged in body and mind to the man who had gone. It was the hard work of the farm that told upon her in the end, for she would not spare herself, and though she had driven and flogged her energy for the 17 years of her widowhood, she could not stand up to the strain when the last test came, and her heart went from her. Little by little, her stock had decreased, and with times being bad, so she was told in Helston, and prices fallen to nothing, there was no money anywhere. Up country, it was the same. There would be starvation in the farms before long. Then a sickness attacked the ground and killed the livestock in the villages round Helford. There was no name to it, and no cure could be discovered. It was a sickness that came over everything and destroyed, much as a late frost will out of season, coming with the new moon and then departing, leaving no trace of its passage save the little trail of dead things in its path. It was an anxious, weary time for Mary Yellen and her mother. One by one, they saw the chickens and the ducklings they had reared sicken and die, and the young calf fell in the meadow where he stood. The most pitiful was the old mare who had served them 20 years, and upon whose broad and sturdy back Mary had first straddled her young legs. She died in the stall one morning, her faithful head in Mary's lap, and when a pit was dug for her under the apple tree in the orchard, and she was buried, and they knew she would no longer carry them to Helston market day, Mary's mother turned to her and said, "There's something of me gone in the grave with poor Nell, Mary." I don't know whether it's my faith or what it is, but my heart feels tired, and I can't go on anymore." She went into the house and sat down in the kitchen, pale as a sheet, and 10 years her age. Listless, she shrugged her shoulders when Mary said she would fetch the doctor. "It's too late, child," she said. 17 years too late. And she began to cry softly, who had never cried before. Mary fetched the old doctor who lived at Magwan, and who had brought her into the world. And as he drove her back in his trap, he shook his head at her. "I tell you what it is, Mary," he said. "Your mother has spared neither her mind nor her body since your father died. And she has broken down at last. I don't like it. It's come at a bad time." They drove along the twisting lane to the farmhouse at the top of the village. A neighbor met them at the gate, her face eager to impart bad news. "Your mother's worse," she cried. "She came out of the door just now, staring like a ghost, and she trembled all over and fell down in the path. Mrs. Hoblin has gone to her and Will Cyril. They've lifted her inside, poor soul. They say her eyes are shut." Firmly, the doctor pushed the little gaping crowd away from the door. Together, he and the man Cyril lifted the still figure from the floor and carried her upstairs to the bedroom. "It's a stroke," said the doctor, "but she's breathing. Her pulse is steady." This is what I've been afraid of, that she'd snap suddenly like this. Why, it's come just now after all these years is known only to the Lord and herself. You must prove yourself your parents' child now, Mary, and help her through this. You are the only one who can. For 6 long months or more, Mary nursed her mother in this, her first and last illness. But with all the care she and the doctor gave her, it was not the widow's will to recover. She had no wish to fight for her life. It was as though she longed for release and prayed silently that it would come quickly. She said to Mary, "I don't want you to struggle as I have done. It's a breaking of the body and of the spirit. There's no call for you to stay on in Helford after I'm gone. It's best for you to go to your Aunt Patience up to Bodmin." There was no use in Mary telling her mother that she would not die. It was fixed there in her mind, and there was no fighting it. "I haven't any wish to leave the farm, Mother," she said. "I was born here, and my father before me, and you are a Helford woman. This is where the Yellens belong to be. I'm not afraid of being poor, and the farm falling away. You worked here for 17 years alone, so why shouldn't I do the same? I'm strong. I can do the work of a man. You know that." "It's no life for a girl," said her mother. "I did it all these years because of your father, and because of you. Working for someone keeps a woman calm and contented, but it's another thing when you work for yourself. There's no heart in it then." "I'd be no use in a town," said Mary. "I've never known anything but this life by the river, and I don't want to. Going into Helston is town enough for me. I'm best here, with the few chickens that's left to us and the green stuff in the garden, and the old pig, and a bit of a boat on the river. What would I do up to Bodmin with my Aunt Patience?" "A girl can't live alone, Mary. Without, she goes queer in the head or comes to evil. It's either one or the other. Have you forgotten poor Sue, who walked the churchyard at midnight with the full moon and called upon the lover she had never had? And there was one maid before you were born, left an orphan at 16. She ran away at Foulmouth and went with the sailors. I'd not rest in my grave, nor your father neither, if we didn't leave you safe. You'll like your Aunt Patience. She was always a great one for games and laughing, with a heart as large as life. You remember when she came here 12 years back? She had ribbons in her bonnet and a silk petticoat. There was a fellow working at Trellowaring, had an eye to her, but she thought herself too good for him. Yes, Mary remembered Aunt Patience, with her curled fringe and large blue eyes, and how she laughed and chattered, and how she picked up her skirts and tiptoed through the mud in the yard. She was as pretty as a fairy. What sort of a man your Uncle Joshua is, I cannot say, said her mother, for I've never set eyes on him nor known anyone what has. But when your aunt married him 10 years ago, last Michaelmas, she wrote a pack of giddy nonsense you'd expect a girl to write, and not a woman over 30. They'd think me rough, said Mary slowly. I haven't the pretty manners they'd expect. We wouldn't have much to say to one another. They'll love you for yourself, and not for any airs and graces. I want you to promise me this, child, that when I'm gone, you'll write to your Aunt Patience and tell her that it was my last and dearest wish that you should go to her. I promise, said Mary, but her heart was heavy and distressed at the thought of a future so insecure and changed, with all that she had known and loved gone from her, and not even the comfort of familiar trodden ground to help her through the days when they came. Daily her mother weakened. Daily the life ebbed from her. She lingered through harvest time, and through the fruit picking, and through the first falling of the leaves. But when the mist came in the morning, and the frost settled on the ground, and the swollen river ran in flood to meet the boisterous sea, and the waves thundered and broke on the little beaches of Helford, the widow turned restlessly in her bed, plucking at the sheets. She called Mary by her dead husband's name, and spoke of things that were gone, and of people Mary had never known. For 3 days she lived in a little world of her own, and on the 4th day she died. One by one, Mary saw the things she had loved and understood pass into other hands. The livestock went at Helston Market. The furniture was bought by neighbors, stick by stick. A man from Coverack took a fancy to the house and purchased it. With pipe in mouth, he straddled the yard and pointed out the changes he could make, the trees he would cut down to clear his view. While Mary watched him in dumb loathing from her window as she packed her small belongings in her father's trunk. This stranger from Coverack made her an interloper in her own home. She could see from his eye he wanted her to be gone, and she had no other thought now but to be away and out of it all, and her back turned forever. Once more she read the letter from her aunt, written in a cramped hand on plain paper. The writer said she was shocked at the blow that had befallen her niece, that she had had no idea her sister was ill. It was so many years now since she had been to Helford, and she went on. There have been changes with us you would not know. I no longer live in Bodmin, but nearly 12 miles outside on the road to Launceston. It's a wild and lonely spot, and if you were to come to us, I should be glad of your company wintertime. I've asked your uncle, and he does not object, he says, if you are quiet-spoken and not a talker, and will give help when needed. He cannot give you money or feed you for nothing, as you will understand. He will expect your help in the bar in return for your board and lodging. You see, your uncle is the landlord of Jamaica Inn. Mary folded the letter and put it in her trunk. It was a strange message of welcome from the smiling Aunt Patience she remembered. A cold, empty letter giving no word of comfort and admitting nothing, except her niece must not ask for money. Aunt Patience, with her silk petticoat and delicate ways, the wife of an innkeeper. Mary decided that this was something her mother had not known. The letter was very different from the one penned by a happy bride 10 years ago. However, Mary had promised, and there was no returning on her word. Her home was sold. There was no place for her here. Whatever her welcome should be, her aunt was her own mother's sister, and that was one thing to remember. The old life lay behind, the dear familiar farm and the shining Helford waters. Before her lay the future, and Jamaica Inn. And so it was that Mary Yellen found herself northward bound from Helston in the creaking, swaying coach through Truro town, at the head of the fall, with its many roofs and spires, its broad cobbled streets, the blue sky overhead still speaking of the south, the people at the doors smiling and waving as the coach rattled past. But when Truro lay behind in the valley, the sky came overcast, and the country on either side of the high road grew rough and untilled. Villages were scattered now, and there were few smiling faces at the cottage doors. Trees were sparse, hedges there were none. Then the wind blew, and the rain came with the wind. And so the coach rumbled into Bodmin, gray and forbidding like the hills that cradled it. And one by one the passengers gathered up their things in preparation for departure. All save Mary, who sat still in her corner. The driver, his face a stream of rain, looked in at the window. "Are you going on to Launceston?" he said. "It'll be a wild drive tonight across the moors. You can stay in Bodmin, and go on by coach in the morning. There'll be none in this coach going on but you." "My friends will be expecting me," said Mary. "I'm not afraid of the drive, and I don't want to go as far as Launceston. Will you please put me down at Jamaica Inn?" The man looked at her curiously. "Jamaica Inn?" he said. "What would you be doing at Jamaica Inn? That's no place for a girl. You must have made a mistake, surely." He stared at her hard, not believing her. "Oh, I've heard it's lonely enough," said Mary, "but I don't belong to a town anyway. It's quiet on Helford River, winter and summer, where I come from, and I never felt lonely there." I never said nothing about loneliness," answered the man. "Maybe you don't understand, being a stranger up here. It's not the 20-odd mile of moor I'm thinking of, though that'd scare most women. Here, wait a minute." He called over his shoulder to a woman who stood in the doorway of the Royal, lighting the lamp above the porch, for it was already dusk. "Missus," he said, "come here and reason with this young girl. I was told she was for Launceston, but she asked me to put her down at Jamaica." The woman came down the steps and peered into the coach. "It's a wild, rough place up there," she said. "And if it's work you're looking for, you won't find it on the farms. They don't like strangers on the moors. You do better down here in Bodmin." Mary smiled at her. "I shall be all right," she said. "I'm going to relatives. My uncle is the landlord of Jamaica Inn." There was a long silence. In the gray light of the coach, Mary could see that the woman and the man were staring at her. She felt chilled suddenly, anxious. She wanted some word of reassurance from the woman, but it did not come. Then the woman drew back from the window. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "It's none of my business, of course. Good night." The driver began to whistle, rather red in the face, as one who wishes to rid himself of an awkward situation. Mary leaned forward impulsively and touched his arm. "Would you tell me?" she said. "I shan't mind what you say. Is my uncle not liked? Is something the matter?" The man looked very uncomfortable. He spoke gruffly and avoided her eyes. Jamaica's got a bad name," he said. "Queer tales get about, You know how it is, but I don't want to make any trouble. Maybe they're not true." "What sort of tales?" asked Mary. "Do you mean there's much drunkenness there? Does my uncle encourage bad company?" The man would not commit himself. "Oh, I don't want to make trouble," he repeated, "and I don't know anything. It's only what people say. Respectable folk don't go to Jamaica anymore, that's all I know. In the old days, we used to water the horses there and feed 'em, and go in for a bit of bite and drink, but we don't stop there anymore. We whip the horses past and wait for nothing. Not till we get to 5 lanes, and then we don't bide long." "Why don't folk go there? What is the reason?" Mary persisted. The man hesitated. It was as though he were searching for words. "They're afraid," he said at last. And then he shook his head. He would say no more. Perhaps he felt he had been churlish and was sorry for her. For a moment later he looked in at the window again and spoke to her. "Will you not take a cup of tea before we go?" he said. "It's a long drive before you, and it's cold on the moors." Mary shook her head. Desire for food had left her, and though the tea would have warmed her, she did not wish to descend from the coach and walk into the Royal, where the woman would have stared at her and people would murmur. Besides, there was a little nagging coward in her that whispered, "Stay in, Bodmin, stay in, Bodmin." And for all she knew, she might have given way to it in the shelter of the Royal. She had promised her mother to go to Aunt Patience, and there was no going back on her given word. "We'd best be going then," said the driver. "You are the only traveler on the road tonight. Here's another rug for your knees. I'll whip the horses on when we've climbed the hill out of Bodmin, for it's no night for the road. I shan't be easy in my mind until I reach my bed in Lunston. There's not many of us likes to cross the moors in winter time, not when the weather's dirty." He slammed the door and climbed to his seat. The coach rumbled away down the street, past the safe and solid houses, the busy winking lights, the scattered people hurrying home for supper, their figures bowed against the wind and rain. Through the shuttered windows, Mary could see chinks of friendly candlelight. There would be a fire within the grate, and a cloth spread on the table. A woman and children sitting down to their meal while the man warmed his hands before the cheerful blaze. She thought of the smiling countrywoman who had been her fellow passenger. She wondered if she was now sitting at her own table with her children by her side. How comfortable she had been, with her apple cheeks, her rough, worn hands. What a world of security in her deep voice. And Mary made a little story to herself of how she might have followed her from the coach and prayed her company and asked her for a home. Nor would she have been refused, she was certain of that. There would have been a smile for her, a friendly hand, and a bed for her. She would have served the woman and grown to love her, shared something of her life, become acquainted with her people. Now the horses were climbing the steep hill out of the town, and looking through the window at the back of the coach, Mary could see the lights of Bodmin fast disappearing one by one, until the last glimmer winked and flickered and was gone. She was alone now, with the wind and the rain, and 12 long miles of barren moor between her and her destination. She wondered if this was how a ship felt when the security of harbor was left behind. No vessel could feel more desolate than she did, not even if the wind thundered in the rigging and the sea licked her decks. It was dark in the coach now, for the torch gave forth a sickly yellow glare, and the draught from the crack in the roof sent the flame wandering hither and thither, to the danger of the leather, and Mary thought it best to extinguish it. She sat huddled in her corner, swaying from side to side as the coach was shaken. And it seemed to her that never before had she known there was a malevolence in solitude. The very coach, which all the day had rocked her like a cradle, now held a note of menace in its creaks and groans. The wind tore at the roof, and the showers of rain, increasing in violence now, there was no shelter from the hills, spat against the windows with new venom. On either side of the road, the country stretched interminably into space. No trees, no lane, no cluster of cottages or hamlet, but mile upon mile of bleak moorland, dark and untraversed, rolling like a desert land to some unseen horizon. No human being could live in this wasted country, thought Mary, and remain like other people. The very children would be born twisted, like the blackened shrubs of broom, bent by the force of a wind that never ceased, blow as it would from east and west, from north and south. Their minds would be twisted too, their thoughts evil, dwelling as they must amidst marshland and granite, harsh heather and crumbling stone. They would be born of strange stock, who slept with this earth as a pillow beneath this black sky. They would have something of the devil left in them still. Unwound the road across the dark and silent land, with never a light to waver for an instant as a message of hope to the traveler within the coach. Perhaps there was no habitation in all the long 21 miles that stretched between the two towns of Bodmin and Launceston. Perhaps there was not even a poor shepherd's hut on the desolate highway. Nothing but the one grim landmark that was Jamaica Inn. Mary lost count of time and space. The miles might have been 100 and the hour midnight for all she knew. She began to cling to the safety of the coach. At least it had some remnant of familiarity. She had known it since the early morning, and that was long ago. However great a nightmare was this eternal drive, there was at least the four close walls to protect her, the shabby leaking roof, and, within calling distance, the comfortable presence of the driver. At last, it seemed to her that he was driving his horses to an even greater speed. She heard him shout to them, the cry of his voice blown past her window on the wind. She lifted the sash and looked out. She was met with a blast of wind and rain that blinded her for the moment. And then, shaking clear her hair and pushing it from her eyes, she saw that the coach was topping the breast of a hill at a furious gallop, while on either side of the road was rough moorland, looming ink black in the mist and rain. Ahead of her, on the crest and to the left, was some sort of a building, standing back from the road. She could see tall chimneys, murky dim in the darkness. There was no other house, no other cottage. If this was Jamaica, it stood alone in glory, four square to the winds. Mary gathered her cloak around her and fastened the clasp. The horses had been pulled to a standstill and stood sweating under the rain, the steam coming from them in a cloud. The driver climbed down from his seat, pulling her box down with him. He seemed hurried, and he kept glancing over his shoulder towards the house. "Here you are," he said, "across the yard there yonder. If you hammer on the door, they'll let you in. I must be getting on, or I'll not reach Launceston tonight." In a moment, he was up on his seat again and picking up the reins. He shouted at his horses, whipping them in a fever of anxiety. The coach rumbled and shook, and in a moment it was away and down the road, disappearing as though it had never been, lost and swallowed up in the darkness. Mary stood alone, with the trunk at her feet. She heard a sound of bolts being drawn in the dark house behind her, and the door was flung open. A great figure strode into the yard, swinging a lantern from side to side. "Who is it?" came the shout. "What do you want here?" Mary stepped forward and peered up into the man's face. The light shone in her eyes, and she could see nothing. He swung the lantern to and fro before her, and suddenly he laughed and took hold of her arm, pulling her roughly inside the porch. "Oh, it's you, is it?" he said. "So you've come to us after all. I'm your uncle, Joss Merlin, and I bid you welcome to Jamaica Inn." He drew her into the shelter of the house, laughing again, and shut the door, and stood the lantern upon a table in the passage. And they looked upon each other face to face. Chapter 2. He was a great husk of a man, nearly 7 feet high, with a creased black brow and a skin the color of a gypsy. His thick dark hair fell over his eyes in a fringe and hung about his ears. He looked as if he had had the strength of a horse, with immense powerful shoulders, long arms that reached almost to his knees, and large fists like hams. His frame was so big that in a sense his head was dwarfed and sunk between his shoulders, giving that half-stooping impression of a giant gorilla, with his black eyebrows and his mat of hair. But for all his long limbs and mighty frame, there was nothing of the ape about his features, for his nose was hooked, curving to a mouth that might have been perfect once, but was now sunken and fallen. And there was still something fine about his great dark eyes, in spite of the lines and pouches and the red blood flecks. The best things left to him were his teeth, which were all good still, and very white, so that when he smiled they showed up clearly against the tan of his face, giving him the lean and hungry appearance of a wolf. And though there should be a world of difference between the smile of a man and the bared fangs of a wolf, with Joss Merlin, they were one and the same. "So you are Mary Yellen," he said at length, towering above her, his head bent to observe her more closely. "And you've come all this way to look after your Uncle Joss. I call it very handsome of you." He laughed again, mocking her, his laugh bellowing through the house, acting like a lash on the strung nerves of Mary. "Where is my Aunt Patience?" she asked, glancing around her in the dimly lit passage, cheerless with its cold stone flags and narrow rickety staircase. "Is she not expecting me, then?" "Where is my Aunt Patience?" mimicked the man. "Where's my dear auntie to kiss and daddle me and make much of me? Can't you wait an instant without running to her? Haven't you a kiss for your Uncle Joss?" Mary drew back. The thought of kissing him revolted her. He was either mad or drunk anyway. Probably both. She did not want to anger him, though. She was too frightened for that. He saw the question pass through her mind, and he laughed again. "Oh no," he said, I'm not going to touch you. You're safe as church with me. I never did like dark women, my dear, and I've better things to do than to play cat's cradle with my own niece." He jeered down at her contemptuously, treating her like a fool, tired of this joke. Then he lifted his head to the stairs. "Patience!" he roared. "What in the hell are you doing?" "Here's the girl arrived whimpering for you. She's sick of the sight of me already." There was a little flutter at the head of the stairs, and a footstep dragged. Then the flicker of a candle and an exclamation. Down the narrow stairs came a woman, shielding the light from her eyes. She wore a dingy mob cap on her thin gray hair, which hung in elf locks to her shoulders. She had turned the edges of her hair in a vain attempt to recapture ringlets, but the curl had gone. Her face had fallen away, and the skin was stretched tight across her cheekbones. Her eyes were large and staring, as though they asked perpetually a question. And she had a little nervous trick of working her mouth, now pursing the lips and now relaxing them. She wore a faded striped petticoat that had once been cherry-colored and was now a washed-out pink. And over her shoulders was flung a much-mended shawl. She had obviously just strung a new ribbon in her cap in some small attempt to brighten her dress, and it struck a false, incongruous note. It was bright scarlet and showed up in horrible contrast to the pallor of her face. Mary stared at her dumbly, stricken with sorrow. Was this poor tattered creature the bewitching Aunt Patience of her dreams, dressed now like a slattern and 20 years her age? The little woman came down the stairs and into the hall. She shook Mary's hands in hers and peered into her face. "Have you really come?" she whispered. "It is my niece, Mary Ellen, isn't it? My dead sister's child?" Mary nodded, thanking God that her mother could not see her now. "Dear Aunt Patience," she said gently, "I'm glad to see you again. It's so many long years since you came to us at Telford." The woman kept pawing her with her hands, stroking her clothes, feeling her, and suddenly she clung to her, burying her head against her shoulder, and she began to cry, loudly and fearfully, drawing her breath in gasps. "Ah, stop that," growled her husband. "What sort of a welcome is this? What have you got to squirk about, you damned fool? Can't you see the girl wants her supper? Get her out to the kitchen, give her some bacon and a drink." He bent down and shouldered Mary's box as though it weighed less than a paper packet. "I'll take this to her room," he said. If you've not got a bite of supper on the table by the time I'm down again, I'll give you something to cry about. And you too, if you like," he added, thrusting his face into Mary's and laying one great finger across her mouth. "Are you tame, or do you bite?" he said. And then he laughed once more, bellowing to the roof, and thundered up the narrow stairs with the box swaying on his shoulders. Aunt Patience controlled herself. She made a tremendous effort and smiled, patting her thin locks into place in an old gesture that Mary half remembered. And then, blinking nervously and working her mouth, she led the way to yet another murky passage, and so into the kitchen, which was lit by 3 candles while a low turf fire smoldered on the hearth. "You mustn't mind your Uncle Joss," she said, her manner changing suddenly, fawning almost, like a whimpering dog that has been trained by constant cruelty to implicit obedience, and who, in spite of kicks and curses, will fight like a tiger for its master. "Your uncle must be humored, you know. He has his ways, and strangers don't understand him at first. He's a very good husband to me, and has been so since our wedding day." She pattered on mechanically, going backwards and forwards across the flagged kitchen as she laid the table for supper, taking bread, cheese, and dripping from the big cupboard behind the paneling, while Mary crouched beside the fire in a hopeless attempt to warm her chilled fingers. The kitchen was heavy with peat smoke. It crept up to the ceiling and into the corners and hung about the air like a thin blue cloud. It stung Mary's eyes and explored her nostrils and lay upon her tongue. "You'll soon come to like your Uncle Joss and fit into his ways," continued her aunt. "He's a very fine man, and a very brave one. He has a great name hereabouts, and is much respected. There's no one will say a word against Joss Merlin. We have great company here at times. It's not always as quiet as this. It's a very busy highway, you know. The coaches pass every day, and the gentry are most civil to us. Most civil. Neighbor was in only yesterday, and I made him a cake to take home. 'Mrs. Merlin,' he said, 'you're the only woman in Cornwall can bake a cake.' Those were his very words. And even the squire himself, that's Squire Besot, you know, from North Hill. He owns all the land hereabouts. He passed me on the road the other day, Tuesday it was, and he took off his hat. 'Good morning, madam,' he said, and he bowed to me from his horse. They say he was a great man for the women in his day. Then out comes Joss from the stable, where he had been mending the wheel of the trap. "How's life, Mr. Bassett?" he says. "As large as yourself, Joss," answers the squire, and they both fell to laughing. Mary murmured some reply to this little speech, but she was pained and worried to see how, when speaking, Aunt Patience avoided her eyes. And the very fluency of her words was in itself suspicious. She spoke much as a child does who tells herself a story and has a talent for invention. It hurt Mary to see her act this part, and she longed for her to be done with it, or be silent. For the flow of words was, in its way, more appalling than her tears had been. There was a footfall outside the door, and with a sinking heart, Mary realized that Joss Merlin had come downstairs again and had in all possibility listened to his wife's conversation. Aunt Patience heard him too, for she turned pale and began to work her mouth. He came into the room and looked from one to the other. "So the hens are clacking already," he said, the smile and the laugh gone, his eyes narrow. "You'll soon stop your tears if you can talk. I heard you blathering fool, gobble, gobble, gobble like a turkey hen. Do you think your precious niece believes a word you say? Why, you wouldn't take in a child, far less a bunch of petticoats like her." He pulled a chair from the wall and crashed it against the table. He sat down heavily, the chair creaking beneath him, and, reaching for the loaf, cut himself off a great hunk of bread, which he slabbed with dripping. He crammed it into his mouth, the grease running down his chin, and beckoned Mary to the table. "You need food. I can see that," he said, and he proceeded to cut carefully a thin slice from the loaf, which he quartered in pieces and buttered for her. The whole business very delicately done and in striking contrast to his manner in serving himself. So much so that to Mary there was something almost horrifying in the change from rough brutality to fastidious care. It was as though there were some latent power in his fingers, which turned them from bludgeons into deft and cunning servants. Had he cut her a chunk of bread and hurled it at her, she would not have minded so much. It would have been in keeping with what she had seen of him. But this sudden coming to grace, this quick and exquisite moving of his hands, was a swift and rather sinister revelation. Sinister because it was unexpected and not true to type. She thanked him quietly and began to eat. Her aunt, who had not uttered since her husband entered the room, was frying bacon over the fire. No one spoke. Mary was aware of Joss Merlin watching her across the table, and behind her she could hear her aunt fumbling with ineffectual fingers at the hot handle of the frying pan. In a minute she had dropped it, uttering a little cry of distress. Mary rose from her place to help her, but Joss thundered at her to sit down. "One fool is bad enough, without making a couple of them," he shouted. "Keep your seat and let your aunt clear up the mess. It won't be for the first time." He leaned back in his chair and began to pick his teeth with his nails. "What do you drink?" he asked her. "Brandy, wine, or ale? You may starve here, but you won't go thirsty. We don't get sore throats at Jamaica." And when he laughed at her and winked and put out his tongue, "I'll have a cup of tea if I may," said Mary. "I'm not used to drinking spirits, nor wine neither." "Oh, you're not? Well, it's your loss, I'm glad to say. You can have your tea tonight, but by God, you'll want some brandy in a month or two." He reached across the table and took hold of her hand. "You have a pretty enough paw for one who's worked on a farm," he said. "I was afraid it would be rough and red. If there's one thing that makes a man sick, it's to have his ale poured out by an ugly hand. Not that my customers are over particular, but Then we've never had a barmaid before at Jamaica Inn. He gave her a mock bow and dropped her hand. Patience, my dear, he said. Here's the key. Go and fetch me a bottle of brandy for the Lord's sake. I have a thirst on me that all the waters of Dosemary would not slake. His wife hurried across the room at his word and disappeared into the passage. Then he fell to picking his teeth again, whistling from time to time while Mary ate her bread and butter and drank the tea that he placed before her. Already a splitting headache tightened her brow, and she was ready to drop. Her eyes watered from the peat smoke, but she was not too tired to watch her uncle, for already she had caught something of the nervousness of her Aunt Patience and felt that in some sense they were here like mice in a trap, unable to escape, with him playing with them like a monstrous cat. In a few minutes his wife returned with the brandy, which she put in front of her husband. And while she finished her cooking of the bacon and served Mary and herself, he fell to drinking, staring moodily before him, kicking the leg of the table. Suddenly he thumped the table with his fist, shaking the plates and cups, while one platter crashed to the floor and broke. I'll tell you what it is, Mary Yellen, he shouted. I'm master in this house, and I'll have you know it. You'll do as you're told, and help in the house and serve my customers, and I'll not lay a finger on you. But by God, if you open your mouth and squawk, I'll break you until you eat out of my hand the same as your aunt yonder. Mary faced him across the table. She held her hands in her lap so that he should not see them tremble. I understand you, she said. I'm not curious by nature, and I've never gossiped in my life. It doesn't matter to me what you do in the inn or what company you keep. I'll do my work about the house, and you'll have no cause to grumble. But if you hurt my Aunt Patience in any way, I tell you this, I'll leave Jamaica Inn straight away, and I'll find the magistrate and bring him here and have the law on you, and then try and break me if you like. Mary had turned very pale, and she knew that if he thundered at her now, she would break down and cry, and he would have the mastery of her forever. The torrent of words had come from her in spite of herself, and wrung with pity for the poor broken thing that was her aunt. She could not control them. Had she but known it, she had saved herself, for her little show of spirit impressed the man, and he leaned back in his chair and relaxed. That's very pretty, he said. Very prettily put indeed. Now we know just what sort of lodger we have. Scratch her, and she shows her claws. All right, my dear, you and I are more akin than I thought. If we are going to play, we'll play together. I may have work for you at Jamaica one day, work that you've never done before. Man's work, Mary Yellen, where you play with life and death. Mary heard her Aunt Patience give a little gasp beside her. Oh, Joss, she whispered. Oh, Josh, please. There was so much urgency in her voice that Mary stared at her in surprise. She saw her aunt lean forward and motion her husband to be silent, and the very eagerness of her chin and the agony in her eyes frightened Mary more than anything that had happened that night. She felt eerie suddenly, chilled, and rather sick. What had roused Aunt Patience to such panic? What had Joss Merlin been about to say? She was aware of a fevered and rather terrible curiosity. Her uncle waved his hand impatiently. Get up to bed, Prudent and Patience, he said. I'm tired of your death's head at my supper table. This girl and I understand one another. The woman rose at once and went to the door, with a last ineffectual glance of despair over her shoulder. They heard her patter up the stairs. Joss Merlin and Mary were alone. He pushed the empty brandy glass away from him and folded his arms on the table. There's been one weakness in my life, and I'll tell you what it is, he said. It's a drink. It's a curse, and I know it. I can't stop myself. One day it'll be the end of me, and a good job, too. There's days go by, and I don't touch more than a drop, same as I've done tonight. And then I'll feel the thirst come on me, and I'll soak for hours. It's power, and glory, and women, and the kingdom of God all rolled into one. I feel a king then, Mary. I feel I've got the strings of the world between my two fingers. It's heaven and hell. I talk then. Talk until every damned thing I've ever done is spilt to the four winds. I shut myself in my room and shout my secrets in my pillow. Your aunt turns the key on me. And when I'm sober, I hammer on the door and she lets me out. There's no one knows that but she and I. And now I've told you. I've told you because I'm already a little drunk and I can't hold my tongue. But I'm not drunk enough to lose my head. I'm not drunk enough to tell you why I live in this God-forgotten spot. And why I'm the landlord of Jamaica Inn. His voice was hoarse, and now he scarcely spoke above a whisper. The turf fire had sunk low in the hearth, and dark shadows stretched long fingers on the wall. The candles, too, had burnt down, and cast a monstrous shadow of Joss Merlin on the ceiling. He smiled at her. And with a foolish, drunken gesture, he laid his finger against his nose. I've not told you that, Mary Yellen. Oh, no. I've got some sense and cunning left. If you want to know any more, you can ask your aunt. She'll pull you a tale. I heard her blathering tonight, telling you we kept fine company here, and the squire takes off his hat to her. It's lies. All lies. I'll tell you that much, or you'll come to know it anyway. Squire Besot's too mortal scared to shove his nose in here. If he saw me in the road, he'd cross his heart and spur his horse. And so would all the precious gentry. The coaches don't stop here now, nor the mails neither. I don't worry. I've customers enough. The wider berth the gentry give to me, the better pleased I am. Oh, there's drinking here, all right, and plenty of it, too. There's some who come to Jamaica Saturday night, and there's some who turn the key of their door and sleep with their fingers in their ears. There are nights when every cottage on the moors is dark and silent, and the only lights for miles are the blazing windows of Jamaica Inn. They say the shouting and the singing can be heard as far down as the farms below Rough Tor. You'll be in the bar those nights, if you've a fancy for it, and you'll see what company I keep. Mary sat very still, gripping the sides of her chair. She dared not move for fear of that swift changing of his mood which she had observed already, and which would turn him from the sudden, intimate tone of confidence to a harsh and coarse brutality. They're all afraid of me, he went on. The whole damned lot of 'em. Afraid of me. Who's afraid of no man? I tell you, if I'd had an education, if I'd had learning, I'd have walked the breadth of England beside King George himself. It's a drink that's been against me. Drink into my hot blood. It's the curse of all of us, Mary. There's never been a Merlin yet that died peaceful in his bed. My father was hanged at Exeter. He had a brawl with a fellow and killed him. My granddad had his ears cut for thieving. He was sent out to a convict settlement and died raving mad from a snake bite in the tropics. I'm the eldest of 3 brothers, all of us born under the shadow of Kilmar, away yonder above 12 men's more. You walk out over there across the Eastmoor till you come to Rushford, and you'll see a great crag of granite like a devil's hand sticking up into the sky. That's Kilmore. If you'd been born under its shadow, you'd take to drink, same as I did. My brother Matthew, he was drowned in Trotwartha Marsh. We thought he'd gone for a sailor and had no news of him. Then, in the summer, there was a drought, and no rain fell for 7 months. And there was Matthew sticking up in the bog with his hands above his head, and the curfews flying round him. My brother Jem, damn him, he was the baby, hanging on to mother's skirts when Matt and I were grown men. I never did see eye to eye with Jem. Too smart he is, too sharp with his tongue. Oh, they'll catch him in time and hang him, same as they did my father. He fell silent a moment, gazing at his empty glass. He picked it up and put it down again. No, he said. I've said enough. I'll have no more tonight. Go up to bed, Mary, before I wring your neck. Here's your candle. You'll find your room over the porch. Mary took the candlestick without speaking and was about to pass him when he seized hold of her shoulder and twisted her round. There will be nights sometimes when you'll hear wheels on the road, he said. And those wheels will not pass on, but they'll stop outside Jamaica Inn. And you'll hear footsteps in the yard and voices beneath your window. When that happens, you'll stay in your bed, Mary Ellen, and cover your head with the blankets. Do you understand? Yes, Uncle. Very well. Now get out. If you ever ask me a question again, I'll break every bone in your body. She went out of the room and into the dark passage, bumping against the settle in the hall. And so upstairs, feeling her way with her hands, judging her whereabouts by turning round and facing the stairs again. Her uncle had told her the room over the porch, and she crept across the dark landing, which was unlit, past 2 doors on either side. Guest rooms, she imagined, waiting for those travelers who never came nowadays nor sought shelter beneath the roof of Jamaica Inn. And then stumbled against another door and turned the handle, and saw by the flickering flame of her candle that this was her room, for her trunk lay on the floor. The walls were rough and unpapered, and the floorboards bare. A box turned upside down served as a dressing table, with a cracked looking-glass on top. There was no jug or basin. She supposed she would wash in the kitchen. The bed creaked when she leant upon it, and the 2 thin blankets felt damp to her hand. She decided she would not undress, but would lie down upon it in her traveling clothes, dusty as they were, with her cloak wrapped around her. She went to the window and looked out. The wind had dropped, but it was still raining. A thin, wretched drizzle that trickled down the side of the house and smeared the dirt on the window pane. A noise came from the far end of the yard, a curious groaning sound like that of an animal in pain. It was too dark to see clearly, but she could make out a dark shape swinging gently to and fro. For one nightmare of a moment, her imagination on fire with the tales Joss Merlin had told her, she thought it was a gibbet and a dead man hanging. And then she realized it was the signboard of the inn, that somehow or other, through neglect, had become insecure upon its nails and now swung backwards, forwards, with the slightest breeze. Nothing but a poor battered board that had once known prouder days in its first erection, but whose white lettering was now blurred and gray, and whose message was at the mercy of the 4 winds. Jamaica Inn, Jamaica Inn. Mary pulled down the blind and crept to her bed. Her teeth were chattering, and her feet and hands were numb. For a long while she sat huddled on the bed, a prey to despair. She wondered whether it was possible to break from the house and find her way back the 12 long miles to Bodmin. She wondered whether her weariness would prove too much for her, and if with an agony of fatigue she would drop by the roadside and fall asleep where she lay, only to be awakened by the morning light and to see the great form of Joss Merlin towering above her. She closed her eyes, and at once she saw his face smiling at her, and then the smile changing to a frown, and the frown breaking into 1,000 creases as he shook with rage. And she saw his great mat of black hair, his hooked nose, and the long, powerful fingers that held such deadly grace. She felt caught here now, like a bird in a net, and however much she struggled, she would never escape. If she wished to be free, she must go now, climb from her window and run like a mad thing along the white road that stretched like a snake across the moors. Tomorrow it would be too late. She waited until she heard his footsteps on the stairs. She heard him mutter to himself, and to her relief he turned aside and went along the other passage to the left of the staircase. In the distance a door closed, and there was silence. She decided that she would wait no longer. If she stayed even one night beneath this roof, her nerve would go from her, and she would be lost. Lost, and mad, and broken, like Aunt Patience. She opened the door and stole into the passage. She tiptoed to the head of the stairs. She paused and listened. Her hand was on the banister and her foot on the top stair when she heard a sound from the other passage. It was somebody crying. It was someone whose breath came in little gasps and spasms, and who tried to muffle the sound in a pillow. It was Aunt Patience. Mary waited a moment, and then she turned back and went to her own room again and threw herself on her bed and closed her eyes. Whatever she would have to face in the future, and however frightened she would be, she would not leave Jamaica Inn now. She must stay with Aunt Patience. She was needed here. It might be that Aunt Patience would take comfort from her, and they would come to an understanding, and in some way, which she was now too tired to plan, Mary would act as a protector to Aunt Patience and stand between her and Joss Merlin. For 17 years, her mother had lived and worked alone, and known greater hardships than Mary would ever know. She would not have run away because of a half-crazy man. She would not have feared a house that reeked of evil, however lonely it stood on its wind-blown hill, a solitary landmark defying man and storm. Mary's mother would have the courage to fight her enemies, yes, and conquer them in the end. There would be no giving way for her. And so Mary lay upon her hard bed, her mind teeming while she prayed for sleep. Every sound a fresh stab to her nerves, from the scratching of a mouse in the wall behind her to the creaking of the sign in the yard. She counted the minutes and the hours of an eternal night. And when the first cock crew in a field behind the house, she counted no more. But she sighed and slept like a dead thing.